Hello and good morning to Madam. So today our group will present to you about our three threats. So for the first one is the supply chain compromise via signed malware, and the second one is the hardware or firmware level attacks, and the third one is the weak authentication mechanism. So now I will present to you about my threats. The first one, which is the supply chain compromise via signed malware, type squatting and code signing abuse. So for my threat, supply chain attack with signed malware is a very clever and dangerous hack. It works by poisoning software that we already trust. The hackers get inside a real software company or trick you with a fake one. They put their virus into a program or an update that looks like totally normal. Then they give you the virus a fake official seal called a digital signature. This tricks our computer into thinking the bad software is the good software and allows it to run. How they do it? So, they do it by type squatting. They make a fake software name that is almost the same as the real one. If you make a small typing mistake, you download their virus instead of the real thing. For example, you want to type request and you type request instead of request. With that, you can install another file and the file is bad and corrupted, and they will hack you from the file. The other way is code signing abuse. They either steal a company's official software signature or make a fake one. This makes their malware look totally legal to your security software. So what happens if we install the file? For our computer, the virus gets deep inside the system. It can turn off our antivirus and change our firewall. It hides very well and is very hard to remove. For us as the user, the person using the computer, it steals everything. It takes our private files, message, photos, and so on. It can even turn our microphone on and camera. All of this can start from just one typo, which is the small typing mistake. And for the last one, for our organization or company, the hackers can move through the entire office. They steal company secrets, financial data, and so on. They can watch everything people are doing, all while staying completely hidden. So now I will pass to another presenter to present about their parts.
What is the firmware and hardware level attacks? Hardware and firmware level attacks target code that runs below the operating system, such as BIOS or UEFI firmware, device firmware, microcode, and a dedicated management or security processors. Because this code runs with a higher privilege than the OS and often survive the OS reinstallation. Attackers can remain hidden, persist long-term, access sensitive data like encryption keys, and evade normal security. Intel Management Engine IME, also known as CSME, is a separated microcontroller inside many Intel chipsets that operates independently from the main operating system. It can access memory, device, and networking. By exploiting vulnerabilities or abusing remote management features, attackers can execute code or gain elevated privilege inside IME, enabling persistent compromise, boot manipulation, keys interception, and malware that is invisible to the OS. AMD Platform Security Processors, a PMD PSP, also called ASP, is an isolated secure core that is responsible for secure boot and cryptographic keys storage. Vulnerabilities in PSP or related components such as SMU or AGESA can allow privilege escalation or information leakage, and it usually requiring local access or privilege drivers. AMD mitigated this risk through BIOS and AGESA security updates. What are the impact of the hardware and firmware level attacks. At the operating system level, hardware and firmware level attacks fundamentally undermine OS security guarantees. Attackers can perform boot process tampering, forcing the system to load malicious components before the OS security mechanisms are active. This often leads to kernel compromise, where the attackers gain the highest level of control inside the OS, making the traditional security controls is ineffective. For users, these attacks enable persistent compromise that can survive the system reboots and operating system reinstallation. As a result, users suffer loss of confidentiality through data breaches and theft of sensitive information such as a password and a personal data. Because the attack operates below the OS, it allows invisible long-term control, meaning that the user may not even realize that their device is being compromised. For the organizations, firmware compromise enables For organizations, firmware compromise enable lateral movement across the network, allowing attackers to spread from the one system to another. This can result in a large-scale data breach and theft, operational disruption, and a long-term hidden access. Ultimately, such an attack can cause serious brand damage and compliance violation due to loss of customer trust and failure to meet the security regulations.
Okay, now I will discuss about weak authentication mechanisms, which is one of the most common yet dangerous security weakness in modern operating system. Weak authentication refers to insecure identity verification methods that fail to prevent unauthorized access due to poor design, configuration, or user behavior. How weak authentication occurs? Weak authentication occurs through multiple vectors, which is weak or reduced passwords such as 12345 or just like password only. Second, lack of multi-factor authentication, which is MFA, no second layer of security. Third, social engineering, like phishing emails, fake login page, or impersonation calls. Fourth, system misconfiguration like unchanged default password or disable security features. And the last, unencrypted credential transmission, which is allowing interception over network. These vulnerabilities are often worsened by human factors, such as password use across platform. Then the impact for user is identity theft and financial loss. Then user also especially of personal data through message, photos, and document. And last, loss of trust in online platform cause them to abandon service. A weak password is often the only barrier between an attacker and a user private life. Then for impact on organization, for organization, the stakes are much higher, which is data breaches involving customer records and intellectual property. Then it also can give financial losses from fraud, fines, and recovery costs. And last, operational disruption and reputational damage. A real world example in the 2023 MGM resort attacks, where a single social engineering call led to over $100 million in loss and widespread system shutdowns. The last, for impact on system integrity, once attackers gain valid credentials, they blend in as legitimate users, making detection difficult. This allows them to move laterally within the network, escalate privilege and install malware, and steal or manipulate data undetected. This undermines the entire security architecture and can lead to full system compromise. In summary, weak authentication threatens user, organization, and system integrity. The solution lies in a strong password, mandatory MFA, user education, and secure system configuration. Thank you. Alright, next I will be touching on the issue of the protection mechanisms and also the best practices in order to mitigate these security issues. I'll be going about the three main threats, which is the supply chain compromisation, the hardware and firmware level attacks, and also the weak authentication mechanism. First is the mitigation strategy for the supply chain compromisation via signed malware. Now, in order to counteract this threat, we could use something such as implementing an SBOM. SBOMs are short for Software Bill of Materials. It is a list of inventory of all the software components in our devices. This way, we could trace their origins and also detect any sort of compromised versions of them. Up next is the monitoring for suspicious behavior. This can be achieved by testing a new software in an isolated environment, for example, a virtual machine, in order to detect for any unusual activities in the files. Second but not last is the validation of digital signatures. We can verify that all software is signed with a valid company and delete any sort of unsigned files. And last but not least, it is the verification of package names themselves. This can be done in order to prevent typo squatting, which we will check each and individual letters of the spelling for the software packages before installation. For the second threat is the mitigation strategy for the hardware and firmware level attacks. This can be done by first disabling or neutralizing the management engine themselves. Using tools like ME_cleaner can be used in order to remove any sort of non-essential code to the ME. Up next, it is by enforcing regular firmware updates. This can be done by regularly applying BIOS and also chipset updates in order to patch any sort of vulnerabilities in the ME. Up next, it is the monitoring and also auditing firmware integrity. This can be done by using any sort of specialized tool in order to verify the status and integrity of the management engine. And of course, lastly, it is to block remote management access. This can be done by disabling the firewall to block any sort of remote management interfaces like Intel AMT. Of course, lastly, it is the mitigation strategy for weak authentication mechanisms. First, we can enforce a sort of multi-factor authentication (MFA) everywhere in the device. MFA is basically the requirement of a second form of verification beyond a normal password, which could be a physical key in order to confirm the user's identity during the login process. Up next is the elimination of weak passwords. This can be done by using tools like password managers in order to create or generate strong passwords, and also use these tools in order to remove any sort of weak passwords where possible. This can also be further improved on by using things such as biometrics, so that way passwords themselves don't need to be used. Up next is the principle of least privilege. The application of this principle is pretty much saying that only the required minimum access is only necessary for whatever the users and the system needs to be done. Lastly is the monitoring and also automating the defense. This can be done by watching any sort of authentication activity in real time for any unusual behavior, and using automation tools can be used in order to detect, alert, and also respond to these potential threats quickly.
So using AI made our project work much faster and easier. It helped us understand complicated topics by explaining them in simple ways. It also gave us real examples that started new ideas and discussions in our team. AI was a helpful tool for learning, not a replacement for our own thinking and teamwork. And then what we learned from this project is we learned that no operating system is perfectly safe. Regular updates are very important. Security alerts at the deepest level of the device, the firmware, and if there is attack, nothing above it is safe. We also saw that security is everyone's job, from the people who make the software to the people who use it. Finally, a good teamwork like dividing tasks and talking together was the key to finishing our project well. So I think that's all for our presentation. Thank you for listening.